Welcome everyone to the first panel discussion about diversity of opinions. Today, thanks for introducing the speakers already. Let's just jump right in. Anders has mentioned that talking about disruption is a bit of a violent topic these days. I was just reading, Lutz, that Süddeutsche Zeitung turned 70 years old this October.
Right. Just a week ago, basically.
Just a week ago. And if Wikipedia informed me correctly, the online edition started exactly 20 years ago.
Right.
And they dedicated an editorial office, I think 5 years later, so in 2000. So your office that you're co-heading right now is 15 years old. How is the conversation with your 70-year-old grandmother these days?
It's better than ever before. It was a long way to go. It was hard work to do, to find a common language between the 70-year-old legacy print edition and the online people. But it works. And it's great to see that it works, because it's existentially necessary to get those two units to work as close together as possible, because the one big chance we have for journalism in the digital age is that we have a few hundreds professional journalists with diverse skills, from being many years into investigative journalism to being digital native and basically living in the structures of social media. And if you get those groups to work closely together, you can really form a very powerful journalistic entity.
Okay, Steffi, you have not the same but a similar setup. You manage online communications for Car2Go, car sharing provider by Daimler, if I'm not mistaken. Is there a similar relationship between the old granddad in this case and you heading like a very new field of communicating with the audience? Do you have struggles explaining what you do to other people in the other levels?
I think there's two answers to that question. So the first is that I am a journalist. Like, I have a classical education as a journalist, but I decided that I was going to switch to the company side of things, because companies basically are publishing houses these days, and because I know about digital, I get to experiment a lot, and I get to basically be my own publishing house. So I produce videos, I produce infographics, I manage social media across the world, I write articles, so I get to do all the stuff that journalists do, but from the company perspective. And I think that's also something that journalists have to deal with, that probably more educated people sit on the company side, and they also have the feeling that they are able to publish. So I guess there is a little bit that we could probably address in a bit. But to come back to your question, of course, I mean, digital is hugely disruptive, not only for media, but also for corporate communications. It's changing the way people are thinking, the how stuff is working, and but there is a shift. So of course you have classical PR, which is basically like classical media. Things have always been done a certain way. There are structures in place, but they are changing. Like, we have electronic press kits and stuff like that, where you have to think about how do you help journalists also to tell your story if you still need them to, which of course we do. But also you come in with this pressure of, we have to communicate now, we have to communicate transparently, we have to be authentic, we have to have this two-way communication, which is something I think that's also what journalism is learning, that is not push communication anymore, but this pull communication. It's a two-way thing. Our customer has an opinion that he shares with us, and we really value that. So you have this, I guess, people help you sort of react to your articles, I guess, as well, and help to shape the story with you. Can I just hand it over to him with that.
I would like to introduce Philomena as well, because she has a different take on it, where everyone's trying to disrupt and innovate and change into new directions. Philomena decided to publish a children's book, and not on the family's favorite entertainment device, the iPad, but on paper. Good old paper, and she just last week successfully completed a Kickstarter campaign for that. And yeah, we would be very interested in why you chose an old-fashioned medium for this new generation that actually grows up with iPads, iPhones, etc.
Well, so basically my background is that I studied digital media, so I grew up with it, I'm used to it, but after a few years of only working in digital media, it wasn't very satisfying to me anymore, personally. And lots of things changed in my life, and I became a lot more about being authentic in general. So as I'm very interested in storytelling and have a company for storytelling and always wanted to have my own book, I thought I wanted to do something that's authentic, that's long-lasting, and that's about values. And that's something that people have at home and have in their hands and feel it and know that I send it to them, like personally. It's a handcrafted book also, which is about lovely storytelling, but also lovely illustrations, handmade illustrations, no digital stuff, and handmade print in the end. And yeah, we sold a few copies, but we didn't have a big campaign or fancy stuff. We just contacted everyone personally. I also learned a lot about Kickstarter, that it's not only about online communications and social media. It's a lot of personal messages you send to people and let them know. And I guess we'll come to that, and we had lots of discussions, but that's what my work is about in general, having personal communication with people and telling very personal stories.
Lutz, you said your relationship with your grandmother is fine again, but apparently it wasn't always like that. You have the role of changing from within the media. When you started, like you wrote about media previously, but
true.
Now you're being the changer within an established traditional company. How do you change a company with set values, with beliefs in the print industry, for example?
Basically, with a lot of communication, because it's not about having the solution and ordering everybody to behave in exactly that way and then being able to promise that it's going to work out in the end. That's not the way it goes. Süddeutsche Zeitung particularly is a author's newspaper, so you have many very proud people, very intelligent and very straightforward people, which is the only way to grant for the quality of a paper like that. But you have to address those people, you have to convince those people that there is a necessity to change and to do things differently than in the decades before. And that was about just a whole lot of talking. It took us about 1.5 years of a huge change process to form a cooperation between print and online journalists that is able to serve the needs for a paid content model. Because introducing a pay model for your journalism is not just about having somebody program the slot where you can enter your credit card data and that's about it. If you want people to pay for your content online, it changes everything in your workflows, because you have to get rid of the classical time deadlines, because you have to get the story out to the people in the best moment to get the most reach for your story. And it took us 1.5 years to find a whole bunch of solutions that suit for the single editorial desks, because the solution for the cultural desk is a different one than the one for the economics desk, for example, because the needs in your day-to-day business are different, because the people you reach on the internet for cultural matters maybe are completely different than the ones you reach with your newspaper, which again is different in the economic sector, because using online media for the majority of business people is much more common, for example. So you have to find suitable solutions basically for every story you publish every single day. And that's the challenge you have to face.
But that's not a new challenge. So for other sectors, that's just target audience research and the knowledge that maybe we used to publish articles and they were all in the same paper, and then everybody did their sourcing themselves, what they liked and what they didn't like, and maybe you had a better headline, so they read your article that day, even though they usually didn't. But that's the reality of digital media as such. I mean, if you look at how much you can target stuff on Facebook, for example, how detailed you can go in, that people that like that and that also are going to see your posts and stuff, that I guess that is a learning, but that's probably something that marketing-y people have done for a long time already. So is that something you're learning?
That's a tough question, because it's always tough to compare marketing to journalism, which is not about being a proud journalist and not facing arguments, but
But you need to make money.
That's the basic point. You need to make money in the end, and you need to make as much money as you need to finance your few hundred people. And you need to find a solution for that problem while serving hundreds of thousands of readers that still appreciate your printed copy. So the way you go is not to destroy on purpose the business model that is still working, although shrinking.
But that's just making it more of a product than a form of art.
That's true, but that's one of the fundamental changes that had to take place in everybody's head in that company. You have to tell people that they have to understand the business model of their company, which was not common because there was always a huge Chinese wall between the business part of the media company and the editorial part, for reasons, and for the reason of independence. And now people like me come along and tell them it's not about losing your independence, but you have to understand how the business model works for every single text you write. And the business model does work differently on the internet than in the printed copy, because basically you have to sell every single story to your readers. And that's not a change you can do within a few days, because you have to start to explain how the online business model works. In the very moment we did that, and in the very moment that we saw people understand how digital economy works and how the audience uses our content, the discussions were completely different than before. But that was the necessary change we had to do.
But I think that it's very interesting that the publishing companies actually manage to transform, whereas the film and TV sector that I come from doesn't really manage. Like the big players do, but the public TV, they don't. They now start going to workshops with the heading transmedia storytelling. You know, that's starting now. That's like from 5 years ago. And if you haven't been there, you don't have to start now, because that's like the past.
Taking the risk of having a too easy answer, but one of the reasons, one of many probably reasons, is that the public sector doesn't have that financial and economic pressure.
Yeah.
They are not facing bankruptcy within the next 10 years if they don't find a working paid content model. That's not going to happen.
That's also the difference, I think, between us, or the line between me and you, that you're actually working for like big players who who have to finance all their employees and who have to survive. Whereas I'm coming up with a new thing and I have my total freedom of doing whatever I like and whatever I think I want to put out there and give to the world.
But there's one thing that actually connects you with the two of them is the buzzword storytelling, because not only journalists are telling stories these days, it's not just movies which are telling stories these days, it's brands too. Brands become storytellers, brands turn into media houses basically. So I would like to know from Steffi, what exactly, what's your approach? How do you tell stories? How do you find your audience? And afterwards, it would be very interesting to know from Lutz, how does that actually change the role of the media you work at right now if corporates become media houses?
So I think one challenge is to have all these channels that we have. So we are available across a lot of channels, and some are very visual, some are very limited in their space. Every little channel has their own environment, their own rules, their own community that they work in. So the story that we're telling about free-floating car sharing and a new attitude towards mobility has to be adapted to that. And it's more about finding out how these communities work, and that's again the target audience orientation, to say, okay, I know my message and I know the brand that I love and that I want to communicate, but how do I do that in the best way? And I think there's lots of new things, and I think that's the key. That's also what I'm basically putting towards journalism, that there's so much coming up. I mean, I've seen media across the world experimenting with Periscope. And it's that's the new hot thing, and everybody's trying to figure out how to do that and what to do with it. And I feel that sometimes people don't know what's a hype and what's probably something more long-term to look at stuff like that. So for example, Snapchat is something that just came up that's an entirely different way of storytelling that has not been seen before. Content only exists a few minutes up to 25 hours and is gone. I mean, you can take, everybody knows the methods, you can keep it, but the method of this is you tell a moment. It's not about the epic campaigns in this, it's about being with your customer in that very moment that they're living. And that's a very different type of storytelling that's different than, I love writing well-researched articles as well that takes weeks and lots of protagonists and stuff like that, but that's a different mindset and a different approach that, it's challenging probably.
Gerne, ja. It's again sort of the discussion, can you compare corporate messages to what journalism does? And one thing I find crucial in that debate is I'm not working with a mission. I'm not telling people stories with a mission.
But you are. That's not true. You told me earlier that you have this very clear mission of having quality journalism, right, that everything is true. Right. That's your mission.
That's indeed. If you want to put it like that, that's my mission. But the main difference is that my readers, our readers, the readers of Süddeutsche Zeitung, at any given moment must be secure that our reporting is independent and that we always try to see all sides of the story. Which is basically why I'm convinced that journalists are more important these days than ever before, because there is so much communication and noise out there that it has to be somebody to verify. Social media is a fantastic tool to reach audience. But who tells you whether the story from Tahrir Square in Cairo is true or not? That's the business of media and of journalists, and that's the promise we are making and we have to live up to.
But then a story on Snapchat is a very different animal than what you're describing, and that's sort of the point, and that's probably also what you're...
Which is not to say that we are not experimenting with Snapchat and Periscope and all those tools and try to get a feeling of what suits the necessities of our reporting or not. It's not to say that... the way we tell journalistic stories is changing fundamentally, but the basic principles and the journalistic tools, not the technical tools, the basic journalistic tools still have to be the same, because it's the only argument for a media company to survive.
Philomena, you all also talked about the speed of communication, and the speed of how to react and how to use the channels. And you're saying, let's just take a step back. It's not going to help us really getting a valuable message across, a message with values and authenticity. Like once your children's book is published and you start a new project, will you take it even slower?
I guess so. Yes. I mean, this already took a few years, to be honest, for the development steps. So that was not the only project I was doing. But in general, yes, I love working slowly. Like whenever I work with people who are like, yeah, and can you deliver like in 3 days or next week? I'm like, yeah, okay, I can do that because I can manage, or I know people who can manage to deliver a story. And obviously there are people who are able to tell stories in a very short time frame, like on whatever medium they're using. But I want to take time. In general, I don't want to be pressured with anything, because for what? What do I care about making a brand big? Because what is it worth in like 10 years or when I die? What do I care? I like to help everyone in general. And if I would have been sitting here like half a year ago with all of you people, I would have been like, oh, I have to hand them my business card, I want to work with them because I have a storytelling company, people, But then I had a conversation with somebody who was coaching me, like with a business analyst. And he said, well, Philomena, I feel like you will never have a company with like 200 employees because you're just not like that. I'm really sorry, but you will be a happy person with what you're doing. And it took me a long time to accept that, somebody telling me that I might never grow really big with what I'm doing. But after some time, I was like, well, yeah, but I'm gonna be a happy person, And in the end, that's what everything is about. That's what my work is about. That's what my life is about. Making me happy, making others happy. So I only want to do projects that people and myself can benefit from.
Okay. And when you think about journalism, everything's going faster and faster. You have to verify information very fast. And there are more and more mistakes that are happening, falsified images, etc. To put it in a more positive way, what kind of tools and technologies, and maybe technologies that were developed by startups, do you in the media and also in the brand communication field use to deal with the speed and to deal with that diversity of channels?
If I may, I would answer to what Philomena said seconds ago, because I totally agree. Referring to the content, speed is not the only goal. In other terms, the best thing that can happen to you as a media company is to have an investigative story so exclusive that you are the only outlet to tell that story. And of course, that takes weeks or months or years to research on that. Absolutely fine. And in the end, the product is brilliant. But in the distribution of that story, you have to be very aware of speed, and you have to find the right moment and the right channel of distribution to get the broadest audience for your story. And on the next level, where speed is absolutely crucial, is the development of your company. Not only the way you produce your content, but your strategy, because that's one of the fundamental changes that the media industry has to live up to the innovation cycles of IT industry. And that's where speed is absolutely necessary. But I'm totally with you about that it often takes time to have a perfect story.
And I feel like people have to have the time, you know, to do something good. So that's also what an audience should accept. So we should not only always adapt to that audience that we think wants everything faster, but also communicate that the stuff that's really worth it might also need time. And there are definitely people out there who will accept that. Not for every brand, not for every company, not in every medium we're using. But it might be. And also I feel like there's a big difference between big players who really have to like start new and take on the challenge that online media and technology gives them. But there are also like small players, like individual people who just come up with their very authentic or original story, and they have never thought about a business model or anything. They just put it out there and it becomes huge because it's just good. And that's the different thing, you know? If you start with something that's just really good, there will always be an audience for it, wherever. The audience will find it because the audience will find something that's good. But you have a very different challenge from that, because you start at a totally different point. And from that point to get into these individual stories, that's super hard to do.
Stefanie, I give you the word for the closing remarks.
Oh, okay. I have
sorry,
nothing
the time is
prepared
running
for the
out.
closing remarks. I was just going to say that I think it's true that slowness is appreciated, and also a societal goal more and more, with as a counter movement. You know, it always swings in one side and then to the other. So I think that in a specific context, that's absolutely valid. But I wouldn't condemn speed as such, because I think, especially in the corporate and also I think in the journalistic environment, it has brought a lot of also really cool things. For example, I would argue that authenticity happens under speed a lot, because that's your only option. Like, you don't have time to run it through so and so many loops of people giving their opinion. So I think we are at a point where companies are very authentic because they have to get it out there fast. I think if they have help, then maybe in 30 minutes they can still craft it into something bigger. But I think if you have to stick up for that under speed, you have to be more transparent and also authentic and be close. And that's also, I think, something that you wanted to get at, that there's a certain closeness that's coming up. And I think there's different definitions of that. I think each of us has their own, but I think customers are closer to us than they ever were before. And I think readers also are closer to us. And I think that's a really good thing.
Okay, well, thanks very much. We were talking about disruption technology. It got very human in the end. Thanks very much for joining us for this panel. And we're going to have a little break now, I think.
Yeah.